All right, well, let's get going. Thanks for everybody joining us on the March 15th special CCP meeting devoted to the budget. Madam Clerk, would you please take a roll call? Oh, can't hear you.
Sorry, what about now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, board member Sean Laundrie or Rocio Vega?
Rocio Vega on behalf of Sean Landry.
Thank you. Board member Don Saylor?
Here.
Thank you. Board member Jonathan Raven? Looks like he's absent. Board member Tracy Olson?
Here.
Board member Del Johnson?
Matt Davis is here for the sheriff's office today.
Thank you. Board member John Miller?
Present.
Thank you. Board member Karen Larson?
Present.
Board member Ian Evans?
Here.
Board member Dan Brutnick?
Here.
Board member Garth Lewis?
I just moved him over Lupita, so
Okay.
he should be.
Thank you. Board member Garth Lewis?
Here.
Thank you. Board member Mark Nigel?
Here.
Thank you. And board member Laura Valdez? Okay, looks like she's absent. Oh, no, she is absent.
And no one else is waiting, Eric, to join us that you can see?
Not that I can see. If
Board
anyone
member
wants
wise.
to put
Okay.
anything in the chat.
Supervisor Provenza is with us as well.
Thank you, Supervisor Saylor.
Today's meeting of the CCP is being held telephonically pursuant to the Governor's Executive Order number N-29-20 issued on March 17th, 2020. The order allows governing bodies of local agencies to hold their meetings electronically, provided that members of the public can also observe and provide public comment electronically. Just a few guidelines. Other than CCP members, all lines will be muted and unmuted by the moderator. CCP members, please state your name before speaking. And CCP members who wish to speak should notify me in a brief manner. I will recognize the person to speak and they'll have the floor. We will have public comment after each agendized item. And so we'll move on to agenda item number 2, consider approval of the agenda. Hopefully everyone's had an opportunity to look at it. If they have and there's no issues, can I get a motion to approve, please?
This is Karen. I'll move approval.
Okay, we have a first by Karen,
Mark Nigel, I'll second it.
a second. Madam Clerk, will you please do a vote?
Board member Rocio Vega?
Yes, thank you.
Board member Don Saylor?
Yes.
Board member Jonathan Raven is absent. Board member Tracy Olson?
Yes.
Board member Del Johnson in place. We have Matt Davis.
Yes.
Thank you. Board member John Miller.
Yes.
Board member Karen Larson.
Yes.
Board member Ian Evans.
Yes.
Board member Dan Prutnick.
Yes.
Board member Garth Lewis. Board member Garth Lewis. Okay, looks like he's on but muted. Okay, we'll go to the next board member Mark Nigel
Yes.
and board member Laura Valdez is absent. We'll go back to board member Garth Lewis. Okay. Thank you.
Next up is consider approval of the January 11th, 2021 meeting minutes, agenda item number 3. And we'll open it up to comment if there's any changes that anyone would like to suggest. If not, can I get a motion to approve, please?
This is Tracy. I'd move to approve.
We have a first. Can I get a second, please?
This is Karen, I'll second.
And a second. And Madam Clerk, can we do another vote, please?
Board Member Rocio Vega.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Board Member Don Taylor.
Yes.
Thank you. Board Member Tracy Olson.
Yes.
Board Member Matt Davis.
Yes.
Board Member John Miller.
Yes.
Thank you. Board Member Karen Larson.
Yes.
Thank you. Board Member Ian Evans.
Yes.
Thank you. Board Member Dan Fruitnick.
Yes.
Thank you. Board Member Garth Lewis. Looks like he's gone. And Board Member Mark Nigel.
Yes.
Thank you. And it looks like we have Board Member Jonathan Raven on the line. Eric, I'm having trouble moving Jonathan and,
I just moved him over.
oh, okay, thank you.
Perfect.
Board Member Jonathan Raven, do you vote to approve the minutes from January 11, 2021?
Yes.
Do we have Board Member Laura Valdez? Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Brings us to number 4, public comment. Opportunity for members of the public to address the CCP on subjects related to CCP business and not otherwise on the agenda. Speakers will be limited to 3 minutes. Do we have any public comment?
Yes, Lindsay Wetson? You need to
Go ahead.
unmute yourself.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Weston. I live in Davis, California, Yolo County, and this is my first public comment ever, so I'm a little nervous. I've gone over the agenda, the 100 and something page agenda, which is impressive because what I've been looking at is the concerted effort of the members of CCP, whether it's the district attorney's office or probation, the public defender's office, and health and human services to reduce incarceration in our county, to reduce recidivism through providing appropriate programs, mental health treatment, substance abuse treatment. And the numbers are really heartening, especially when we consider where we were 5 years ago. I've been made aware recently of AB 1542, which has been introduced by Assembly Member Kevin McCarthy, and I believe at the request of the Yolo County District Attorney's Office. And in some, it proposes that there is a pilot program in Yolo County which would allow judges to determine that a property crime was caused in part or whole by a substance use disorder. And then there would be required secured treatment. And one thing I would like to request of this body, if it is a possibility, is I think when I've looked at the CCP mission, at the CCP goals, and at the step up resolution that this board, the Board of Supervisors adopted, that even though perhaps the legislation and the pilot program was conceived with good intentions, that it really violates the CCP mission and the CCP goals and the step up. And I would urge you to consider this as an agenda item in your next meeting, simply because I think the Board of Supervisors may want to hear from you. I don't know if it's appropriate to contact Assembly Member McCarthy, but I think we're looking at something actually quite serious, and the consequences of this are serious. They affect our criminal justice system. They affect our community. And as the mother of someone with a mental illness and substance abuse who's been involved in the criminal justice system, I think the consequences are huge. And so that is my comment, my first public comment.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, do we have any other public comment?
We do not have any additional hands raised.
Okay, thank you. Brings us to agenda item number 5, member announcements. Are there any announcements from the members? Scanning everybody's faces. Does not look like it. Oh, Jonathan?
Yeah, and so I think what Lindsay talked about is a great idea, that this can be discussed agendized at a future meeting, this pilot project. Oftentimes you're very rushed to get draft legislation in, and it becomes public, and then there are many, many amendments. So based on a lot of feedback, the bill has changed drastically. And so that's something that I think is important for all of you sitting here and for the public to know about in terms of where it's at and what direction Assemblymember McCarty wanted to go on based on feedback that we have received and also that he has received. So that would be a great idea.
Others with announcements?
Mr. Chair, if I
Yes.
could. So this is Don Saylor. So I'm delighted to join you as a member of the CCP board this year. And I want to just mention that Supervisor Provenza will remain serving as a partner, as an alternate in this role. And we look forward to working with you all in shared purpose through the course of the year and in providing insights and connection to the entire board.
Thank you. Anybody else? Not seeing any, so we'll move on to number 6. Receive update on the RFP for neighborhood supports. Will? Eric, I should say. I have a Will here at the office. Eric?
Sure. So Eric Will, CCP analyst. Just a quick update on this for the neighborhood supports RFP. So the RFP was posted back in January, and we've put together our subcommittee that has met one time to discuss the RFP process. We did get 3 submissions, and we just finished up having the review panel score the RFP. So we still need to meet again, but I anticipate that we'll have another update for this group at the April 12th meeting of the CCP, and look forward to seeing what kind of efforts we can move forward with this RFP process.
Questions or comments by the members? I'll also open it up to any public comment if we have any on this item.
There are no hands raised here.
And seeing no comments from the members, we'll move on to number 7. Receive presentation on CCP 21-22 budget and provide feedback. And this will be Tom Haynes and Eric Will.
Great, so I'll just kick us off very quickly as Tom is joining the meeting. I've just moved him over. So today we plan on having the focus of this entire CCP meeting really will be to focus on the budget for the CCP moving forward. And so for today's presentation, it's a 2-parter. The first will start off with Tom Haynes from the Department of Financial Services, and then I will follow up with a presentation as well. So we'll kick it over to Tom, and we have a presentation.
Thank you, Eric, and Chair Frignick and members of the CCP. As Eric mentioned, I'm Tom Haynes, Assistant CFO for Yolo County. And as soon as we can pull the presentation up, I'll go ahead and get started. So I have a very brief presentation for you today to go over the preliminary fiscal estimates for the CCP with a focus on the 2021-22 fiscal year. A particular focus on the CCP revenues as a lot is changing at the state level and with the economy. And hopefully that will set the stage for the broader budget discussion by the CCP. If we can go to the next slide, please. So first, just starting with the statewide perspective, these are numbers that are coming essentially from the governor's 2021-22 budget. CCP revenue, as with most realignment, comes in the form of base revenues and growth revenues. Growth is essentially the amount that is collected in excess of the current year's base in any given year, and then it's actually paid in the following fiscal year. So growth received in one year gets paid in the next fiscal year. There's a little bit of a lag time. And what's really notable on this slide, looking at the statewide numbers, is that in 1920, last year, there was no growth revenue because the economy, of course, took a hit with the COVID-19 pandemic. As a result, our revenues in the current year were depressed because there was no growth payment that was expected to come in the current year. However, what we are seeing is that economic activity has rebounded quite a bit more than we initially anticipated. And so the state is projecting the current year to have about $76 million worth of growth revenue in total statewide. That, of course, will then be paid to counties next year in 21-22. Interestingly, the state is also projecting next year there to be no growth as well. I don't really have a lot of information on the details behind that projection and what the assumptions are, but it's interesting to note that they are projecting growth in the current year, but that not next year again. So going to the next slide, please. So this now moves the lens to look at the Yolo County CCP. And again, on the far right, you can see in the shaded area, this is essentially what we are estimating for 2021-22. This is based off of the numbers from the state that we just looked at a moment ago. And the most notable thing that you'll see is that that growth revenue that is attributable to the current year that will be paid next year is estimated to be quite sizable for Yolo County. To the tune of about 1.1, almost $1.2 million. That's quite a bit more than Yolo County has received in any year in the past, and we'll look at some of those trends on the next slide. It's also a little bit offset by the fact that in the current year, we did receive one-time realignment backfill, a little more than $500,000. That was just a one-time general fund contribution by the state, not expected to continue, so we won't be seeing that next year. But even with that estimated growth revenue coming in to the county next year, you can see what it does to the bottom line. The net balance, essentially, which is revenues minus expenditures, actually is projected to turn positive instead of the negative trend that we've seen over the last couple of years. I do want to note that the expenditures here are projected to very roughly just use a very simple 4% inflator. We do need to refine the expenditure estimates a little bit based on cost of living adjustments, other benefits, and so forth. However, if this general picture does hold, you'd see that it would actually contribute some to the fund balance as opposed to drawing down the fund balance as we've seen over the last several years. Next slide, please. With that being said, I do believe that there is reason to proceed with caution. CCP growth has been highly unpredictable over the years, not just in the fact that the allocation is based on fluctuations in the economy, but also based on our performance in a variety of criminal justice metrics. And this has been discussed a number of times in the past. And in some cases, it's our performance relative to other counties throughout the state. So it's very, very hard to predict what our growth receipts are actually going to be. But just looking at the trend, you can see the 4 years spanning from 2015-16 to 2018-19, our receipts were in each year much lower than we're estimated to receive next year. In fact, on average, just around $336,000. So the amount that we are projected to get next year is quite a bit larger than we've seen in the past. Next slide, please. So just a few key takeaways, again, from my perspective. The healthy growth that's estimated for next year certainly will look to benefit the CCP budget in the 21-22 fiscal year. I do believe that this growth amount is likely an anomaly, and there may be reason to consider at least a portion of it as one-time revenue, as opposed to assuming we'll see this level of growth each and every year. Over the long term, the trend does continue to reflect a structural imbalance for CCP. We are seeing that trend slightly reverse again in the projection for the upcoming year, but any reversal of that, and we saw that the state's not projecting any growth in the following year, that could actually reverse that trend. Also, as many of you will recall, back in 2016, the CCP did approve a reserve policy, but it was never funded. This will, of course, be part of your broader deliberations, but the CCP may wish to use this opportunity to use some of this growth windfall to fund the reserve to some level. That concludes my portion of the presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Seeing no questions, I think we'll move forward with the rest of the presentation. And if there are any questions for Tom, we can circle back at the end of the presentation. But I have a few slides, so if we could bring back up the presentation. Thank you, Lupita. And we'll just continue them. Next slide, please. Perfect. Okay, thank you. So thank you, Tom. Once again, Eric, Will, and the CCP analyst. And so today, just another quick set of slides for everyone here as we progress this CCP budget process. And first off, I just want to say that, you know, this process has been the result of the work of the CCP budget ad hoc. And so just want to thank those members who have represented the CCP in these extra efforts as we really try to dig into the CCP budget and determine what the next steps are. So for this afternoon, I'll be providing an update regarding the CCP budget ad hoc update process. At the end, we'll have time for questions and then anticipate a lot of discussion as we move forward. I will note that we are looking forward to discussing, or I'm looking forward to discussing the budget in April as well. So just please note that this is our initial conversation and we anticipate that this will continue forward. So for today's presentation, we're really seeking to just provide an informational update that helps us in our discussion as we look toward April for recommendations for the budget. Today, I'll be outlining 4 main topics, looking at the process we've taken, the findings that we have, recommendation we're looking at, and then next steps. Next slide, please. So in terms of process, back in September last year, the board requested changes to the CCP's budget to ensure that the budget reflects the CCP strategic plan. This has been an ongoing process for the CCP in ensuring that we look at our strategic plan, look at our budget, and really make sure that they're meshed together. So to implement this request, the CCP approved the formation of the CCP Budget Ad Hoc Committee to help gather information and to develop recommendations for the upcoming budget cycle. So that was in October 2020. Furthermore, the CCP looked to cement its bylaws and add a budget-specific meeting, so that's our meeting today, to really make sure that we can get a jump start on this budget process this year and try not to push it to the end of the budget cycle where we can't make as many changes or be as innovative with how we're using our funds. So from January to March, we've had the opportunity to do some data collection. So as many of you will note or remember, I sent out a request back in January, really just for our broad information about the CCP programs, the purpose of those programs, as well as ties to the strategic plan. And then now today we have our CCP budget meeting as we look forward. Next slide, please. Thank you. So part of the process we've undergone is bringing together this CCP Budget Ad Hoc Committee that consists of representation from Health and Human Services, the Public Defender, District Attorney, police, as well as community-based organizations. And so this group has come together in several meetings over the last couple of months to discuss the budget, to look at ways that we might find alternatives to how we're doing things currently or how we've been doing them for the past decade at this point for the CCP, and seeking to see if there's just different ways or more innovative ways to really ensure alignment with the CCP's strategic plan. So as I noted in the previous slide, back in January, this group sent out a request to all CCP departments for the budget information, including a list of programs funded by the CCP dollars and their purpose, data, metrics, and outcomes associated from fiscal year 2021, and just really looking to to get this packet of information. And this is the package that has been attached to the CCP's agenda packet this week. So that's why it's 100 pages plus this week is that's all the information that we've gathered so far in determining what programs that we're funding through the CCP, looking what the funding levels are, and then tying those to the strategic plan where we can. Next slide, please. Thank you. So through this process of data collection and in speaking with DFS staff, 2 major findings have been discovered thus far. So as Tom mentioned, CCP growth is volatile, and I'll get into that a little bit more in the next slide, but it's not a huge surprise, I think, to folks in terms of how the state's allocation process has worked. And as Tom mentioned, there's a competitive set or side to this allocation as well. So depending on how well a local jurisdiction does in comparison to other counties is deterministic of what they'll actually receive for the CCP. The second is in looking at clarifying how our expenditures are tying expenditures specifically to AB 109 and not necessarily just criminal justice work or work that we are doing here in the county that may bleed into the CCP's work. Next slide, please. Great. So I just wanted to go over this sort of volatility that we're talking about. So these graphs are a little bit small, but you can see the definite bump in the second striker reduction for Yolo County on the left. So looking from the 2015-16 year, spiking up in 2016-17, and then dropping to 0 actually in 2017-2018. And so this is just one of the ways that CCP is determined in terms of budget at the state level. And we actually have a full list of these programs that we can release to the members after the meeting, but just wanted to give a quick example of what this volatility looks like. So when we're looking at the budget, we can't just assume that we'll have the same level of budget each year within these different categories. And we can't actually even know how we're going to do until we get there effectively. So 1 year's success may not lead to this sustainability ongoing based on how the state is doing its allocation. So as Tom mentioned, this volatility really causes us to take a step back and make sure that we're looking at ways that we're budgeting the CCP that's not making assumptions that we will just grow year over year necessarily. So we can actually spike completely down to 0 in several of these categories in any given year, and in another category go up by 1 million. And so it's really this volatility that's very hard for us to track. Next slide, please. And then my second note about findings is regarding to the ties to the CCP strategic plan, which I think has challenged the CCP for some time, and really challenged the county, I think, in general for some time in looking at how do we tie outcomes and metrics to what we're doing with our budget dollars. What programs are we funding? What positions are we funding? And how do they show us whether or not we are succeeding or not? And if we are succeeding, to what level are we succeeding? And I think that the next note I'll make about this is just that data gathering and sharing is really something that we've talked about, I think, a lot over the last year in the CCP, but it's something that we just have to continue to grow in our efforts just because we have different systems we use for data collection. We have different contracts that we use for how we're collecting data and what types of metrics. And so it's something that over time, I think we can continue to combat, but it's the reality in which we're living with right now. We have different systems, we have different levels of data capturing, we have different staffing levels for how we actually are able to process and analyze this data. So it's just all things we need to be aware of as we look toward the budgeting process moving forward. Next slide, please. Okay, so in terms of a recommendation, and I'll just note that this is not a recommendation necessarily for action today. This is a recommendation for a concept as we look forward for the budget process. So as the budget ad hoc committee has been meeting, been really trying to wrap our arms around what might the CCP budget look like in the future in a way that makes the most sense and is equitable to the members of this group while also serving the goals and the mission of the CCP. So with these findings that I've just discussed, looking at volatility and looking at how we can tie things to the strategic plan, the current recommendation or the concept that we would be seeking to move forward with would be a percentage-based budget system. I'm going to talk a little bit about what that might look like for the CCP, just to give everyone a quick overview. And after that, I'll have a quick sample of what we're talking about in terms of percentages. and then we'll have some time for discussion about this. So in terms of a system for budgeting, this system would help establish clear delineations for funding priorities and would also set precedent for an annual budgeting process within the CCP. This method of budgeting would provide flexibility from year to year depending on outcomes and needs, and would be based on outcomes and needs that can be proven by the different departments that would allow us to move forward with this uniform approach to capturing data and metrics, as I mentioned, and to actively seek to ensure innovation within the CCP is held in balance with us allowing to do the required activities and requirements of AB 109. Furthermore, this budgeting system would allow for change over time and maintenance of effort as we seek to shift the CCP budget. In our conversations with the CCP budget ad hoc, everyone realizes that when we're talking about budgets, we're talking about FTEs, we're talking about programs, and so significant shifts can't happen without recognizing that we have to make significant changes to how we're doing our business. So it makes sense to make sure that we're looking at this model or this system of budgeting and making sure we're not just saying that everything will just completely change overnight. There needs to be a maintenance of effort. We need to have a sort of contingency to make sure that we continue doing our operations. But we ultimately need to look at the budget in a different way. We need to look at it from a different perspective. And so with that, a part of this process would really be to look at how we can not only just change our perspective on the budget, but how we can support this with an administrative process and tracking. And so part of this process, which we haven't quite got to yet because we wanted to have this discussion first, would be that not only would we have a budget change, but actually have an administrative tracking form or set of forms that would be uniform for the members of the CCP to be filled out on an annual basis so that everyone's on the same level playing field as we're filling out these forms. And I anticipate the development of these forms would be a full CCP effort to make sure that it's equitable to this group. But it's not just saying that we're going to do a budget and then just magically making it happen. It's having the administrative backbone to make sure that we have the forms we need to submit on an annual basis to do it early, and forms that would actually illustrate to the group what we're doing with the dollars or the expenditures that we're using to make sure that the CCP strategic plan is happening. And so with that, that's just a quick overview of what necessarily a budget or percentage-based budget might look like. But I wanted to just provide a quick sample of what we're talking about. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. And so this is just our current budget right now. And when I say sample, all I'm doing is illustrating the percentages we have currently with the CCP. So for the different areas within the CCP budget currently, we're kind of all over the map. So we range from 1.6% all the way up to 41.4%. And so these are just the different percentages that we're looking at when we're talking about the budget. What we talk about when we're talking about percentage-based budgeting would be to say, for example, if we were to give 25% to treatment because we think that that's an equitable approach to how much treatment should be valued within our budget. Or if we say in the other category, we should value this at 5%, and we have to be able to back that up and say, these are the reasons why it's backed up and why it's fulfilling or would fulfill the CCP strategic plan. And so I'm not noting any specific numbers for change today. As I mentioned, this is more for an informational conversation and for our discussion about as we move forward. And we just recognize, I think, even within the budget ad hoc committee, that even if there are numbers set by the CCP this year, those numbers would be subject to shifting. So if, let's say, we look at the other category at 5% one year, if we can't justify the means for that the next year, then it gets bumped down to 4% or 3%. Or if we found that there needs to be a huge shift in treatment and we need 3%, then we need to look at how that shifts within the CCP budget. But it's looking at those percentages to look at an equitable way to make sure that dollars are being used for programs that are needed to specifically implement AB 109 and the CCP strategic plan. And as I mentioned before, part of this process is a phasing process. And so as we mentioned, there's the concept of looking at maintenance of effort, of having a contingency built in. So I've actually noted that within the other category. So having this sort of pocket, or I guess pot of money as we go into St. Patrick's Day, a little pot of money for the CCP. Having this as a contingency where we have flexibility with our dollars so that we're not just stuck within the same way that we're doing things, but have the ability to make sure that we can cover costs when they come up. So once again, saying that we're looking at this process as this moving process as one that's not just going to happen overnight, because we recognize what that means in terms of cuts, but having the ability to say we want to make shifts and we can cover it where we can in terms of the CCP. I'll also note that by having this other category or having contingency, we're working within the volatility of the CCP growth. And so if we have 1 year where we're doing really well and we have money, great. We can fund all the programs we want to, all the FTEs. If we don't the next year, we need to have a plan to make sure that we have the dollars so we're not scrambling at the end of the fiscal year trying to figure out what to do. So really trying to give ourselves this flexibility within this volatility while also allowing for innovation within the CCP. As we have with the most recent budget, we've started to look at these new programs and proposals like the Neighborhood Supports RFP, looking at parenting classes. And so really being able to stay open to those ideas when they come up, or if we can leverage our funds for grant programs or whatever may come our way, is really important in allowing us to look at the CCP budget in an innovative and creative way. And we could go to the next slide, please. Awesome. So I will be wrapping this up in just a second and we'll open it up to discussion. But the plan really at this time, and this will be based on the discussion today, is really to look at April 12th for our next conversation about the CCP budget, looking to, in between that time, now and then, looking at additional data gathering where necessary, really exploring the possibilities for strategic plan and budget alignment within our strategic plan. So making sure that how we're devising our budget really does align with what we already have developed in the 2019-2022 CCP strategic plan. Then coming back with a recommendation for action for more specific percentages within this percentage-based budget. And then finally, I'll just note that looking to actually have a draft CCP budget and or strategic plan back to the Board of Supervisors by June of 2021. So this is really getting ahead of where we've been in past years, where we've really pushed up against the budget season. And I know that Tom and his staff will appreciate this as we try to move things just a little bit ahead to give ourselves more time so we can have this conversation with the Board of Supervisors, get their feedback, and then look forward to the budget as it comes into September for adoptive. So with that, I will close my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions and really just wanted to offer this as an opportunity for discussion as we move forward. And then I guess also if any of the budget ad hoc committee members wanted to add anything to my presentation, just wanted to offer that up as well.
Excuse me. Thank you, Eric. We'll open it up to members first, then we'll go to the public. Comments, questions? Supervisor Prevents, I think you're still on mute.
I'm sorry.
There you go.
I did have a question on the percentages. If you could go back to that slide. I think it was about 1 or 2 slides ago. Percentages between departments. There you go. Thank you. Most of those are actual departments, but then on top is treatment. Are the percentages for treatment pulled out of the department budgets? Because I know probation and the public defender, DA, really all of them could be spending money for treatment. So did we pull those numbers out and then subtract from the budgets, or is that just treatment in HHS?
I believe, and Tom, maybe you can help if I get this wrong, but I think those treatment dollars were backed out of each department's budget. For us, for instance, probation is a pass-through for a lot of the treatment, and I know those numbers have been backed out for us.
Okay, so
This is Karen. I could just say that a portion of this is Health and Human Services, the contracts that we hold with our substance use disorder providers. The Day Reporting Center is also a large piece of this, about half. And then I think we have a smattering of other, like the house where we house the the house where we have probationers, that a piece of that's in this as well. Those are the main buckets.
Okay, yeah, I was trying to determine if that 14.6% is all the treatment. Sounds like it is if it was pulled out of the of all the budgets. Thank you.
Others?
But this is Don.
Yes.
So I think that those percentages that that slide portrays, that's the actual. So if we were to think about the strategic plan as it's derived, I wonder what would be an optimal approach to allocating the funds available by those program categories. And is there some way of looking at how to right size, if there is, maybe that's not the best phrase, but how to alternatively size the approach going forward, tying to the strategic plan. If we do have a year of growth, I thought Tom's presentation was very interesting. And as usual, our fiscal staff, whenever there's a potential increase, they're keen on looking at let's create a reserve and let's consider it only one time. That's the usual stuff, and it usually makes good sense. And the question that we have is, how can we use this opportunity, if it actually materializes, to move forward to address more of the strategic plan efforts? And as we look at some of the expenditures that we've been making, do those categories of expense stand up in high competition with potential innovations that would address the strategic plan efforts? There are some expenditures in the package, for example, for electronic monitoring, we might want to take a look at and see, is that the most appropriate deployment of funds? Or maybe there are others that we should take a look at. So I think that we have an opportunity with the strategic plan and changing funding levels to always be looking at how do we maximize the goals that the original language that established the CCP had in mind. So that's one of the lenses I think that the board has an interest in, and certainly one that I have an interest in.
Dan, if I could just piggyback on what Supervisor Saylor just said. I do think, if we think back to, first of all, it was great to be a part of the budget ad hoc. All of my co-members on there did a great job. It was a very educational experience, and I think we really kind of thought about, from our perspective, if we were starting from scratch, how would we recommend that the CCP funded the different departments, the different things we do. And so, and to Supervisor Saylor's point, if we think about the intention, the spirit of AB 109 and how this money was intended to be focused on rehabilitating folks and keeping them out of custody, I do think we would probably have made different choices at the outset about how we allocated those funds. And so I have always said since the beginning, and before I even worked for the county, that I feel strongly that at least 20% of the CCP budget should go towards treatment. In a perfect world, which I know we're not in, I think that the percentage amount allocated for treatment should be equal to that allocated for law enforcement, because that is what is the intention and the spirit behind AB 109. I realize we probably won't get there, but those are the types of conversations we had in the budget ad hoc, and kind of the discussions. If we looked at what AB 109 is intended to do and what we have on the strategic plan, what we want to achieve, how would we allocate the budget percentage-wise?
Thank you. Mark, looks like your hand's up.
Yes, thanks. Mark Nigel here from the community-based side. First, it was great to piggyback what Karen said about the ad hoc committee. We had great dialogues, and we recognized that AB 109 has an impact on all the departments, and that was probably really good thinking back in 2011, 12, 13, might not be as relevant to, what we know now. So having that Also, categories for new programs and innovative programs was something that we also discussed. So, you know, it would be great to start clean and just to develop a brand new budget. But as mentioned, we recognize that there's FTEs and good work that is happening, and the maintenance of effort would also give those departments that maybe had a change an opportunity to find other funding if they valued those programs or wanted to maintain those if there was going to be a change in funding. But we did recognize that, you know, all departments are impacted by the population and the legislation in 2011, and that, you know, when you look at the percentages, they are all over the place in terms of, you know, I think they were derived by kind of almost what's happening right now with DJJ, where you're wondering what are those things going to be, and you're anticipating, but then you actually, you know, have done this for a while. So, and that's kind of where we're at now. So I think we have a lot of information, and it doesn't mean the programs, you know, weren't effective. It's just that we know so much more now, and that's why we wanted to look at a percentage base. And, you know, when you kind of look at the current one, that gives us a really good starting point. And then on the other note was data. You know, when we were asking for everybody of data to kind of validate, you know, what was the intent of your program and what metrics do you have to measure the effectiveness of it, we thought if we could create some standards within that are aligned to the CCP goals, that would really create some transparency when it comes to seeing if a program was effective or if it needed to change.
Thank you. Tracy, your hand's up.
Yes, I know Eric said it, but I just want to reiterate, this is really today is just an update of what we've done so far and where we're thinking we're going. And to give everyone this information about what a budget or percentage-based budget is, preparing to come back with more specifics as to a budget next time to see what the full CCP thinks about it. But we're clear, we're not done. We're just simply kind of giving an update. Like I said, we're going to need some more data, and then we're going to have to put some hard decisions in place for a recommendation for the next budget. But I wanted to make clear that we are going to be making a recommendation, and that we haven't done it yet.
Anyone else before I open it up to the public? Supervisor Provenza?
Yes, I have another question. The AB 109 dealt with, of course, treatment and rehabilitation programs, but also, as has been discussed, attempting to make up for additional costs imposed by the departments because of the additional people that the state was sending our way. And one of the, I guess, in terms of a question, will you be looking at how those impacts have played out over the years since AB 109 was enacted, to see how the percentages would work out in that, given that there's multiple purposes for the 109 funding?
Yes, I believe that's the intent. I'll let the ad hoc, if they have ideas on that, respond.
Yes, I mean, I like someone said earlier, a lot of the different departments have been impacted. When we first came up with our budget, frankly, in 2011, we had certain assumptions as to what AB 109 was going to do. There were some people that argued that AB 109 was going to lead to massive crime increases, that we were going to need all of these jail beds, we were going to have to put, you know, additional police officers out on the pavement. And some things have come true and some things have not. So we are going to be focusing, and that's one of the reasons we asked for data, is what are the actual AB 109 impacts, and are we using the money for the stated purpose, which is taking this population that normally would have gone to prison, but instead are in our hands, and trying to figure out how to make them productive and healthy and safe.
Okay.
Yes, we're into the
With that, I'll open it up to the public. Do we have any public comment?
Yes, Saska Wright.
Ms. Wright?
Hi. First off, Will, your background makes me smile. This made the meeting. Second of all, but perhaps even more importantly, the work of this subcommittee heartens me so much that you're asking these questions that I haven't had a chance to read your 104-page document, which I just figured out how to open from the website. But just scanning it, I'm seeing really good performance measurement data being expressed. And the conversation of aligning it to your strategic plan, this is the first time I've seen results from that desire in the 4 years I've been a public observer of this process. And this is what your mission is. And this is such an improvement and such a great step forward. I look forward to seeing the full recommendations. I have to agree that the intent of the legislation is to help those who've been caught up in the law get back on track and not just be punished, but to actually have the resources to be successful in our communities. And as much as you can keep moving in that direction, I think you're really helping our communities be well and really doing your part for creating safer communities. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Do we have other public comment?
There are no additional hands.
Okay, I'll turn it back to the group for anything else related to this. All right, for me,
Well,
go ahead.
One thing, Dan, I think that the timeline, I appreciate that this is a good conversation. The timeline that has this coming to the Board of Supervisors in June is going to be a bit of a crash at the end there. It would be because we'll be adopting the budget in early to mid-June for the, it would be nice if we had this as a part of that consideration. So that would might mean coming to us before that. If there could be a May conversation with the Board of Supervisors, that would be preferable, I believe.
Okay.
And I would just note that we currently have an April 12th meeting scheduled, but we do not have anything scheduled for May. So if there would be an interest in a May meeting of the CCP to make sure we could push something through, that's potentially an option.
I think we'll more than likely have to have a special meeting to keep everything going. All right, last chance for any comments or questions or feedback. Not seeing any, move us to number 8. And does anybody oppose ending the meeting? Seeing none, we will end it. I thank everybody for your time and all the hard work that's gone into this so far. Appreciate it. Thank you, guys.